Hallo, welkom bij een nieuwe Claranet SmartTalks. Vandaag gaan we het hebben over pentesten. En omdat ik zelf geen pentester ben, kan ik er niet al te veel over vertellen. Dus heb ik een collega bij me. Een collega uit Portugal, dus deze SmartTalk zal ook in het Engels zijn. Maar laten we beginnen met mijn collega, Tiago.
Hi.
Welcome in the Dutch studio. And great that you're here. You were on an event yesterday and it went great from what I've heard. Could you please introduce yourself?
Thanks. My name is Tiago Carvalho. I'm a pentester and a trainer for Naast secure, part of Claranet cybersecurity team. I do mostly training and pentesting year round, and from time to time I get the experience of sharing that with everyone else here. And this time was in the Netherlands with a very interesting group of people.
Yeah, good to hear. So you also train, you said? Do you also train at the Black Hat
Yeah,
events
we have.
and stuff like that?
Currently, we're working on a new content for our advanced infrastructure hacking training. We have a bunch of new things that we're going to introduce at Black Hat this year around AV evasion, new techniques for escalation, including a new Linux, brand new Linux section. So there are a lot of new interesting things going in there this year. So the training side is most of the work we did in the past 3-4 months.
Okay.
So far, yeah.
And with pen testing, you only work for Portuguese customers, or?
No, it's
throughout
the
the world?
internet security is something that it doesn't have any borders.
True.
The issues are across in the cloud environment, and a lot of the issues we having are basically borderless. So I have worked with a very interesting bunch of clients, yes.
Can you
From,
elaborate a little bit?
Government, energy sectors, telcos, banking institutions, with NDAs, and some of the best work is under NDAs. It gets a bit tough to get on the details, but yeah, a lot of those probably will sum up most of the biggest.
Yeah, because pentester, of course, always is close to the shady hackers. So, as a pentester, what are you doing exactly?
And pentesting is a very interesting field to be in, because we tend to be seen as the people that find problems and not as problem solvers, generally speaking. But we're essentially trying to come up with ways to help the local teams and help the corporate environment to find a sweet spot between having their ability to work and work safely, and keeping that in a manageable manner, and at the same time ensuring that the environment is safe and free from, or as free as possible from security issues as it is usually is. There's also a side effect of this, is the pen testers usually can introduce a lot of leverage when we're talking about legacy equipments, for example, or old applications. These days, in software houses are pretty much dwindling these days, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And we see a lot of organizations having old software that they don't have access to the source code, was bought as is, a piece of tool that does a specific purpose, and over time it basically is left alone without any maintenance whatsoever. It's usually a great source of great deal of problems. And the local teams often engage with us, saying, okay, we need to assess this group of set of tools or assets in order to establish if they're imposed a risk or not, and to create basically some leverage around it, or a case if it comes up to be replaced. So there's not only negative sides to it, as we usually see. Pen testing also has a human factor. It's like one of the most prominent ways of getting in is actually the human mistake. I don't believe that that's ever going to disappear completely. We can dwindle it down a bit. There are other factors that for the corporate environment and for the financial side of things are not as comfortable. Last year we've seen a raise of a few groups that are offering significant sums of money for paying to purchase valid credentials from employees. So approaching employees directly and making offers. That's on the rise, especially where I'm from. And is creating a bit of an uncomfortable situation, because it's a position where currently the roadmap and all the things we have in place didn't have into consideration the ability to prove that a user sold its credentials or didn't got stolen. And it's not, it's an area, it's a situation where it's not easy to prove that actually happened. They can always try to say, for example, oh no, I was reusing my password.
But that's a trend that you're actually seeing. So
yeah,
the insider risk is growing.
No,
more.
the insider risk, especially, we tend to see this. We tend to say this within the field that there are a few stages within a year for pen testing for the issues to rise. When summertime arrives and everyone from universities has a break and they need to find something to do with their free time. So a lot of a lot of malware tends to be evolving in that side of things. But also when financial distress happens, a lot of activity is rising.
So end of the year then, also when year closings, or maybe the first month of the new year, during year closing.
Especially within the economical crisis, we tend to see a lot of activity there. Ransomware actually made that rise a bit further than it used to be, because a lot of groups too got a significant amount of financial leverage out of that, unfortunately. And the company and although the cybersecurity doesn't have borders, authorities need to communicate with themselves, and we have like serious issues with when it comes to between countries, especially.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges. You have, of course, internet doesn't have border, but legal borders are there, so it's hard to cross them sometimes.
They use that a lot. For example, in Portugal has a great relationships with other countries, especially those who speak Portuguese. But that's not true when it comes to law interactions. There are a lot of banking malware going around. There are a few active groups, known active groups from Brazil, for example. And Brazilian authorities are a bit slow on the response when it comes to that. And that's one of the examples of, there's a specific group that has a very active, it's been very active for the last 4 years, with a significant amount of money being extracted from accounts, bank accounts. And it's being increasingly difficult to stop, unfortunately. But the other side of things were actually, we had quite a significant challenges. The cloud and COVID was the best seller for cloud, definitely. So we had new interesting cases coming out in pen testing where we had to deal with the fact that the borders of the networks are basically disappearing. For the users themselves, they're no longer aware of the fact where their corporate network ends and where everything starts. And for the IT itself, it's generating also unexpected outcomes when they're setting up the environment. For example, up until now, most of the IT personnel, when they said an asset, this given asset is only to be accessed for authenticated users, for example. An internal asset, we're talking about only the employees have access to the infrastructure, so only they are authenticated to have access to that resource. When we're talking about a cloud, that's not true. Okay, the public, when a cloud is the internet or AWS, Azure, or whatever vendor we're talking about, the asset is online, which means that anyone can have an account on AWS and Azure or whatnot. If we do exactly the same thing, when we say it's authenticated users only, means anyone with access to the AWS or Azure or whatnot. And the shift, even for technical people, this small shift that happened in a short amount of time didn't happen with enough time for them to have this small difference to sink in. So a lot of the issues we're finding is the assets are set up for authentication, but anyone with authentication on AWS or Azure or not are allowed to have access to sensitive information that organizations are unaware of that are exposed, and those lead lead to a lot of interesting cases where we're able to go from the cloud environment into the corporate network, and then.
But does it also mean that as a pen tester you're touching home networks then now?
Unfortunately, we are starting to see cases where we will have to consider that as a threat as well. The internet, I usually call it the Internet of Vulnerable Things, because unfortunately we created ourselves in an ecosystem where companies make money out of pushing new products out. And it's increasingly difficult to make any decent amount of income out of maintaining a piece of software.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why software houses went into almost extinct to this time. So what happens is we have new products coming out all the time, internet enabled, and there is no law or no plan to make that profitable, which means that we have an insane amount of vulnerable devices. Now, the threat actors will always explore the easiest path in.
Of course.
And there are interesting cases where we're starting to see they getting in from a home router, piggybacking on the employee and leveraging the access of their home network in their own laptop or the devices they're in, to then eventually get in, because that's the easiest path in. So that eventually will start to be considered as a risk more and more.
Yeah. So important to use VPNs.
Not only the VPN, but how the VPN and how that asset is being set up. It is crucial, which leads us to another sensitive topic. That it's often overlooked. When we're talking about security, we often tend to forget that things need to be usable and employees need to work. Any path that is offered a significant resistance will lead to unknown paths for the employees to do their work, right? And one of the most effective ways to block that is when you lift a tunnel, you block the machine from communicating to any device on that network. That's actually really effective. The problem is if the user has any need to use anything from an external resource that is next to him, even if it's a corporate resource, that means he will need to put the tunnel down, do that action, put the tunnel up. Yeah. And that's another step into the time. So often those things lead to very interesting bypasses. So the other classical example, and one that it's actually closer to my experience because I was a developer for 7 years, is when you have, for example, external consultants, and they have, even considering that they have a decent laptop, which is not always the case. And one of the paths that you usually exploit, find the external consultant, is the fact that they need to share information with local employees, right? Yeah. And unfortunately, here is where software and and proprietary software becomes a problem. Because, for example, if we consider two different organizations, and considering if we have the encrypted laptops from those two different organizations, chances are they're not going to use the same software. So they're not interchangeable. Yeah. Which means that if I take a USB drive and I need to get some information from this computer to the other computer, they will need to find a way to make sure that they are obeying the policies on one side that tells you cannot copy anything to the outside without being encrypted, and also be readable to the other laptop, which is probably not running the same software, and hopefully not running with local admin privileges, so not be able to install anything. So right there, we have an interesting use case, and one that usually leads to the whitelisting, the bypasses, the special cases, they're often
exactly.
abused by us during the pen test, and
People start using Dropbox and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's where usually where we stop seeing as enable as a roadblocks, because the security needs to be usable, and the sweet spot is to land there. Otherwise, you will have a locked up environment where it's not productive.
No, I can imagine what you're saying there.
Yeah.
Are you only doing digital pen testing, or are you also doing physical pen testing, so that you actually try to enter buildings and do your thing?
Yeah, we have a few experiences recently where we had to engage with the IT support with one of our clients. That's an interesting aspect. It's one that not all organizations are comfortable with. Fortunately, physical security is somewhat different these days. Although those types of jobs tend to be a target because those tend to be in the low income, and the low income is on this day and age, especially in an economical crisis, a target by itself.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the targets is usually to target those people because they're more vulnerable. But unfortunately, most of them actually take their job quite seriously. So entering a building directly, it's not as easy as it used to be.
That's good
But
news,
it's not something that we frequently do. We usually, I did this once, not get into the building, but we dropped an interesting package in a building's balcony that managed to allow us to do the same.
That's good.
Yeah.
What's the funniest thing that you ever did or experienced, and what you're allowed to talk about?
Well, interesting is a very peculiar way of saying things. There are a lot of cases where by itself it gets curious, but at the same time gets us wondering what possible solution for those. For example, I was once working for an investment assessment for an investment company. They had an interest control in place, and the fingerprints of the device got mingled up. Ended up being included in a batch of testing that it's not supposed to be, which ended up with all the doors of the building opening up. Because electronic lock doors where I'm from need to be open if they're electronically controlled in case of an emergency. So everyone looks at the pen test to say, what have you done? That case was interesting not only because of that peculiar situation made us laugh afterwards, but because it led me to realize that even if you have enough skills to attempt to solve that problem, you will face significant resistance, and it will reach a point where it's not financially viable for you to intervene. Yeah, so in that particular case, I pursued 3 levels deep in 3 different countries in attempting to reach out the manufacturer, and I was unsuccessful. So I ended up having to deliver the unfortunate message to the client saying, you will need to purchase a new interest control and replace everything in the building because this one is not going to be patched. Other interesting cases where we do testing and we realize the client's already compromised. It's other interesting cases because most of the time they're trying to block something that is already known. I have the incorrect expectations, and those meetings are usually interesting.
Yeah, that I can imagine.
The Social Engineering Act is one of the interesting things that I usually calling IT support and telling, hey, my computer is blocked, can you give me the recovery key? And oftentimes that actually happens.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I thought nobody would give them anymore then, especially now that not an IT department.
That's the key element that everyone has, the sense of urgency. When you call an IT support and say, I really need to get this done. I'm on a time frame here. I can't remember the pin.
They rush decisions.
Can you help me out? Okay, good. We've had a case recently where the operator tried to confirm my identity. And he actually was doing quite well doing so, because he asked me for a piece of information that I didn't have. But using that sense of urgency, he actually managed to drive the conversation into something like, can't you use something else, like a phone, for example? Because that piece of information I had.
Yeah.
And he go, okay, I have here a phone. Can you confirm that information?
He was close.
Yeah,
he was close.
I know that this piece of information is there. So it is one of those cases where it's difficult to work. We also have other different challenges. Like I've used this in the presentation yesterday when I'm doing phishing exercises, for example. Phishing training is essential to get. So one of the training the employees themselves in phishing is crucial. But there's also for other factors, non-technical authors need to be taken into consideration. In that particular case, we hit a plateau, and things were not moving from that point. And we're trying to come up with ways to get that passed, because there was still a significant amount of phishing to people being clicked. Yeah. And one of the employees engaged with me and said, I'm working for this company for 10 years, and I've never been raised. And I have the feeling that the company doesn't really worry about me. So I need this job to make ends meet, but I really don't worry about the organization. Sorry. I know you're doing a job, but I will click on everything that falls into my inbox. So those things are unfortunate messages that we have to give to the client, but also allow us to engage into side thinking and considering, okay, we need to find a solution to address this, or at least drive the client into something that will eventually help them to solve that problem, other than you have to look out for your employees.
The new security employee of the month will be the one who doesn't read his email because he won't click.
But that's actually the other side effect. You know, there's actually, now that we're talking about this, is an even funnier story with a colleague of ours. So we were at Plaquette, Canada last year. It was the end of COVID. So when we traveled in, we had to wear masks in the plane and whatnot, that kind of level of things that you got used to. And when we landed, he got a message from what clearly looked pretty sketchy, and said that you need to go to this URL and register for a COVID test because you've been randomly selected. And we looked at the link, we looked at the website, and we was like, this seems really sketchy. I'm not clicking on it. And eventually we got information that if it turned out to be true, he would risk a fine of a significant amount in Canada. So we ended up calling the authorities to confirm that if that was actually legit. It turned out that as sketchy as it looked, in that case was actually the case. Really? It was actually legit, yeah. But when, in our field, when you get so suspicious, that kind of situations can happen. And for an employee, that might mean that you might affect productivity.
Yeah, but then it's good to verify that.
Yeah, that alternative channels are a good thing to confirm, and having that capability in place and knowing that everyone has that option and easily available is a good strategy.
Okay. Moving to the main takeaway, why should people have their environment pen tested?
Well,
organizations.
Organizations need. There's something that I usually say that I think it's one of the best arguments we can give. We do the best we can with our clients in the time frame that we are allowed to, because we're talking time is translated into cash essentially. Yeah. We're talking about something like that. So, unfortunately, the threat actors don't have budgets, they don't have time constraints, and they don't have scopes. Those three things every pen tester and every pen testing project has. So one of the crucial elements of pen testing is no reasonably decent budget will ever cover an entire organization, especially if it's of a given size. So pen testing and frequent pen testing is important because the organization needs to be aware and in a stage where they can work with a plan and feasible over time, over a given time, be able to cover a significant amount of percentage of their environment.
Yeah.
With pen testing. So it's not something that you should do on the beginning of the year or the last or a few last month of the year that we're usually used to see. It's something that you should be taking in consideration the risk assessment, which is something that we are starting to do as well with our clients. In order to establish priorities on a pen testing, focus on that, and help the teams to prioritize in the pen testing. So it's important and crucial because over the duration of a year, you will have a wide range of vectors coming into the environment that will be translated into threats. The fact that exploits and vulnerabilities are quite valuable these days also means that it's not always the case where we have a proof of concept to deliver to the client to help them have a clear perspective of what the risk is for a given vulnerability. So pen testing is not something that we should continue to do like we've been seeing so far. Companies using either the beginning of the year or the end of the year. It's more productive to have like the risk into consideration and spread that over the year.
So that's where threat modeling helps to prioritize which segment you should test first and then go to the next.
The threat risk assessment and that is crucial because that allows the organization to keep track of their risks, their foes, and limit the number of vectors to focus on that will eventually represent most of the risks that the organization is currently facing. And being aware of that will not only be translated into an optimal work downwards, because the SOC and all the defense teams can filter out and focus on a given number of attacks instead of looking at the full scope, but also for the pen testing as well, because then you have a clear view of what you should test and when to establish the priorities of the patching itself. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Tiago, thanks a lot for this informational Smart Talk. We really learned a lot here, so thanks a lot for that.
Thanks.
Mocht u nou toch nog vragen hebben na het kijken van dit filmpje, neem dan gerust contact met ons op. Dan zullen wij komen heel graag bij u op locatie uitleggen wat het belang van pentest is en hoe wij jullie kunnen helpen om jullie organisatie nog een stukje veiliger te maken. Bedankt voor het kijken en tot de volgende keer.